There is a point in each life when the burden of other people's expectations weighs so deeply on the heart that we lose the echo of our own inner voice. Fear of rejection creeps in like a shadow, governing our decisions, muffling our true self, and binding us to a never-ending quest for acceptance. But listen, giving in to this fear does not keep you safe, it holds you captive. And until you break free, you will never really know the strength, the freedom, and the value that already lies within you. Today, let us discover how to overcome the fear of rejection and learn to love ourselves without anyone's approval. The fear of rejection is a quiet but pervasive power, quietly shaping the contours of our lives long before we are even aware of its presence. It starts at childhood when we learn through words, behavior, or lack of behavior about earning approval, conditional love, and being safe only if we are ourselves in part. Out of these early learnings comes a shadow within the psyche, an internalized voice that cautions, restricts, and threatens. It is a voice that says to move forward, to tell one's truth, to be oneself, is to court disapproval, to be excluded or abandoned. The effects of this internalized dread are deeply felt, for it does not only control behavior, it constructs the very structure of the self, limiting expansion, suppressing creativity, and confining the domain of possibility within which the person can reside. This fear of rejection is evident in myriad forms. A person may be reluctant to express a thought for fear that it will not find favor with the hearer. A person may stifle desire or ambition. Dreading censure, a person may take on others' opinions, ways, or tastes, figuring that to conform is the only protection against expulsion. The mind is a wary, calculating machinery, constantly weighing, adjusting, and negotiating with an assumed bench of judges whose decision is seen as having final authority, and yet there is this tribunal that sits in the realm of one's own mind, built from experience and projection that is at best partially grounded in the outside world. The external world is less censorious than the internal world, and still, the individual is ensnared by the geometry of internal expectation, a captive of their own fear. It is important to understand that this fear is not just an emotional nuisance, it is a psychic compulsion, an archetypal shadow that attempts to control the ego via insecurity. It is an expression of the ageless human dilemma of belonging and uniqueness, of the need to be with others and the need to be true to oneself. To yield to such fear is to constrict oneself, to sacrifice independence in order to bask in the transitory heat of outside approval. And the approval of others, however bountiful, is not a substitute for affirmation of one's own existence. To exist under the shadow of fear is to exist halfway, to go through life with gestures half completed, dreams half defined, and the nagging feeling that something vital has been left out of existence itself. The initial step toward freedom, therefore, is awareness. The fear of rejection needs to be seen, not excluded. One has to look at it for what it is: a response, a projection of fear, and a leftover from previous hurts that are no longer useful to the current self. Confronting this fear is not a violent exercise of self-confidence, but a conscious meeting with the inner topography of the mind. One must sit with it, experience its twinges, and study its patterns. Where does it come from? When does it shout loudest? What truths does it hide about our own unrealized needs, wants, and untapped potential? By illuminating these shadows, the individual starts taking control of their own psyche back. No less significant is the awareness that fear of rejection tends to enlarge perceived consequences. The human mind is skilled at building complex stories of failure, humiliation, or social ostracism. We expect derision as though it is unavoidable, but these expectations are seldom fulfilled. It is not always disastrous to be rejected. It is often a neutral or even educational experience, offering information instead of judgment. By redefining rejection as a normal aspect of interaction instead of a judgment on value, the individual takes away some of its power. The mind is no longer a stage of paralyzing fear and becomes a laboratory of self-discovery, a field where the self can be expressed, tried, and perfected. In its most fundamental sense, fear of rejection is an opportunity for self-reflection. It poses the question: do you value your life separate from others? Do you respect the life force inside of you? Or do you succumb to outside pressures to obtain approval? This question cuts through the outer layers of personality and asks for realness. The bravery to face rejection cannot be separated from the bravery to face oneself, for in every risk of vulnerability, every move into possible disapproval, the self is tested and made stronger. The person discovers that their very center remains sound, unmoved by the changing judgment of the world. Finally, fear of rejection is stripped of its power not by evasion or coercion, but through deliberate recognition, introspection, and the development of inner value. The psyche, if respected and explored, comes to learn the lessons of uneasiness without sacrificing its integrity. What previously bound becomes a mentor, leading the person toward increased wholeness, strength, and self-awareness. In seeing the shadow of fear, in remaining in the face of rejection without running away, one finds a basic truth: the power of life does not reside in others' judgment, but in the seeing and acknowledging of one's own existence. The freedom from fear of rejection is not a once-for-all action, but a practice for a lifetime, a dedication to respect the self in each exchange, to speak, to act, and to create without the burdens of conditional approval. It is the start of an uninhibited life where the soul, free from its fantasies of judgment, can blossom in its own radiance. Rejection is perhaps the most deeply misconceived experience of human existence. Since we are little, we are taught to dread it, to view it as a judgment upon ourselves. When the child is corrected, when the peer walks away, when the authority rejects acknowledgement, the message sinks deep into the mind that our worth is not absolute, that it needs to be earned, that it is subject to others' opinions. But this is a perilous delusion. To confuse rejection with inadequacy is to confuse shadows cast by another for the radiance of your soul. Reflect for a moment on what rejection is. It is always something outside of us, something which reflects not our true nature, but the awareness of someone else. It is something which arises from their perceptions, their limitations, their fears, and their personal judgments. When someone refuses you, ignores you, or criticizes you, it is not your being that they touch. It is their own inability to see fully, to understand completely, or to engage courageously with what is authentic in you. Yet the human mind is prone to absorb these reflections as truth, to allow the mirror of another's judgment to become the measure of our selfhood. This is where the inner work must begin. To value oneself independent of rejection is not arrogance or delusion. It is a reclaiming of reality, a recognition that worth exists as an intrinsic quality of the soul. No external denial can diminish what is fundamentally yours. The self is not contingent upon applause, acceptance, or the embrace of society. It is, in its essence, whole, complete, and sufficient. This is not a truism to be lightly understood, but a reality to be profoundly felt, such as the awareness that the sun still rises even when clouds hide it from our gaze. Rejection, if reflected on mindfully, shows what it really is. It is just a signpost, an indicator that you are running up against powers that do not sing from your own authenticity. Each rejection, each refusal is embedded in a lesson, a pointer towards the fields where your life can be more expansively lived. To let rejection hurt the ego is to lose its meaning. It is not designed to humiliate or annihilate. It is designed to illuminate, to assist in discerning between the transitory approval of others and the abiding approval that lies within. The path to embracing this truth is not an easy one. The ego, vulnerable and susceptible, hungers for acceptance. It desires to be perceived, known, and confirmed. It will rebel against the notion that rejection matters not, that your worth remains unaffected by the opinions of the world. But the psyche has layers much deeper than the ego, layers that talk of wholeness, meaning, and abiding worth. To turn inwards, to access these deeper levels, is to find a freedom that no rejection can invade. Think of the mind as an enormous landscape. Across its surface there drift the winds of opinion, the storms of criticism, the wispy clouds of praise. But down below the surface there is a foundation, firm and immovable, where your genuine self stays. Rejection only hits the surface, it cannot reach the bedrock of who you are. To realize this is to become aware of it, a deep freedom. You are no longer subject to the fleeting opinions of others. You are rooted in the knowledge that you are worth something simply for being here. Further, fear of rejection usually conceals a more fundamental fear, the fear of the unknown, of the unexplored potentialities within ourselves. When we define self-worth by acceptance, we live in a small way, we shrink, we conform, we shape ourselves into shapes that will be familiar to others, hiding the essential aspects of who we are. Rejection, ironically, can serve as the gateway to honesty. Every time you are rejected, ignored, or misunderstood, you are offered a decision to let it deplete you or to let it illuminate for you the way to your authentic self. In real life, this equates to the development of a relationship with yourself that cannot be shaken. It takes reflection, courage, and honesty. Start by noticing the judgments of others without taking them on. Ask yourself what truth, if any, resides in this self-reflection and what is contained only in the limits of the seer. By separating out these two, you unravel your own sense of self from the determining influence of external voices. You realize that rejection is not a judgment on your existence, but a signal, sometimes sore, sometimes informative, that points you toward greater self-knowledge. The final awareness is deep. Your value is non-negotiable. It can't be taken, lost, or withdrawn by any power outside of you. It is independent of social validation, applause, or compliance. It is a living, breathing reality inside you that is available at any time when you look inside and take it. Rejection does not define you. It cannot. It is only your own recognition of your intrinsic value that can determine the life you live, the decisions you make, and the honor with which you follow your course. There is a deep well of worth within every person that is neither provided nor taken away by others' judgment. This reality, while easily stated, tends to be the hardest to accept. From the very moment of our birth, we are immersed in a world that compares us to outside standards, family, peers, society, and institution standards. We come to know, both consciously and unconsciously, that love, respect, and belonging are negotiated in terms of conformity, performance, and approval. And in seeking these outside ratifications, we tend to lose touch with the inner reality that is the authentic us. In order to grasp the independence of self-worth, we first need to recognize the insidious manner in which approval weaves its hold. It is a soft murmur in the mind, "You are valuable if they approve." It insists upon conformity, conditioning action, thought, and even desire by the ephemeral judgments of others. When we are complimented, a passing elation runs through us, and we might confuse this momentary recognition with proof of our value. When we are rejected, refused, or overlooked, we experience a pain as though something inside us has been shattered. And all this is a misconception. Approval and disapproval are outward events, fleeting and subjective. They are part of the external world and not part of the essence of yourself. To confuse them with your value is to let the world determine the measurement of your life. Self-value's independence starts with seeing that worth is inherent. It is not something to be bestowed or revoked, and it cannot be added by applause or subtracted by criticism. The soul is not an accounting book where every encounter with others is a credit or debit. In order to really understand this, one needs to have an intimate relationship with oneself, not a relationship predicated on judgment, but on knowledge, acceptance, and recognition of one's own complicatedness. The inner life is a complex and expansive terrain, made up of strengths and vulnerabilities, dreams and contradictions. Each aspect of this interior terrain is valuable. None needs validation in order to be, none needs permission to be worthy. However, the task is to break away from the pattern of seeking validation. This pattern tends to be rooted very early in those early experiences of approval and disapproval. When the child is praised, the brain starts linking love and value to external validation. When the child is criticized or rejected, fear and self-doubt become friends. These patterns gradually set in as unconscious motivations controlling adult behavior. To break free requires awareness and courage, a willingness to observe these impulses without judgment, to see them as the shadows they are, and to choose a different path. The path of self-value independent of approval demands that one cultivate an internal source of recognition and affirmation, a dialogue with the self that is consistent, compassionate, and unwavering. This internal affirmation is not mere vanity or self-delusion. It is a recognition of existence itself, the understanding that the act of being, with all its limitations and possibilities, has inherent value. To acknowledge oneself thus is to put the foundation of life not on transitory sands of other people's opinion, but on the firm rock of inner reality. It permits one to act, to create, and to interact in the world from a sense of authenticity, not from fear of being rejected or need to be approved. Actions become statements about the self, not performances to gain approval from others. Relationships become no longer acts of commerce for validation, but true interactions between two independent individuals. When one is completely imbued with this law, the freedom is great, fear of rejection becomes powerless, the bite of criticism a slight annoyance instead of an identifying blow. Decision is determined not by fear or need for approval, but by values, gut feeling, and moral compass. One starts living in accordance with the true self, and in so doing finds a source of happiness and power that is immune to the transitory opinions of the outside world. The autonomy of self-worth becomes a shield and a compass, directing the individual into wholeness and fulfillment. To establish this autonomy, one must practice daily introspection, mindfulness, and compassion for oneself. It is through careful observation of the inner life, through conversation with the thoughts and feelings, that one starts to take the reality of inherent worth inside. It is not an assignment done in minutes, but one of a lifetime, a slow realization of the fact that the soul is whole, complete, and worthy despite the plaudits or criticism of others. With every moment of acceptance, the foundation is further cemented until others' approval is a luxury that one can choose to indulge in or not, rather than a survival tool. Life itself, in this sense, turns out to be a medium for expression, experimentation, and creation. Released from the bondage of outside approval, the person is free to seek what is real, to accept the totality of experience, and to resist rejection. Self-worth is no longer dependent, it is autonomous, it is the soft, unshakable reality at the center of things, ready to be seen, celebrated, and lived. When one exists from this awareness, the world can still judge, still criticize, still reject, but the soul is intact, unshattered, and aglow. To meet fear is to stand before a great inner country, one that many avoid but few ever really know. Fear, especially the fear of being rejected, is a sneaky despot. It whispers during moments of stillness, intimating that the world will turn its back on you if you step beyond the boundaries of expectation. This dread is not so much a reaction to what is outside, but rather the reflection of the hidden vulnerabilities of the psyche, the unexamined wounds of our youth, the shadows we deny. But it is in confronting this fear, in standing willingly in its face, that we begin to be free. The mind that cowers in anticipation of rejection is the mind that does not yet know its own power. If we let rejection guide us, we let the world tell us how much we are worth, what we should do, who we should be. But the instant we are observing fear without judgment, the instant we see it not as an enemy, but as a messenger, its strength starts to fade. Rejection ceases to hurt when we see it as a reflection of others' limitation and not as a reflection of our own. To confront fear with awareness is to affirm the autonomy of the soul over the whimsical and transient judgment of the outside world. There is a paradox involved. The fact of leaning into fear, of being vulnerable to rejection, paradoxically makes the spirit stronger. The mind, when strained, becomes stronger. Every meeting with the risk of being rejected is an invitation to face one's shadow, the parts of us that we refuse to admit, that seek shelter in what is expected. Confronting the shadow, we do not annihilate it, but we bring it into balance, recognizing that the fear itself holds honest truths about our wants, our needs, and the limits of our courage. The liberation that follows this union is deep. No longer must we move in the world as a frightened shadow of ourselves, but as we who can stand whole, even in the presence of rejection. To feel fear and not escape is an act of immense honesty. It is to see the weakness of the ego, while at the same time insisting that the true self, the profound, long-standing center, is not weakened by outside rejection. There is freedom in this understanding, a ray breaking through the shadows of uncertainty. The soul finds that it is not dependent, that it is not conditional, that it stands on its own despite the acceptances it previously sought. And as we begin to realize this, a new type of courage is born, not the eradication of fear, but the choice to act despite it. This kind of courage isn't gaudy or flashy, it's quiet and unyielding and deeply redemptive. In functional terms, standing up to fear alters how we relate to the world. Things we previously found terrifying, telling our truth, making a dream possible, feeling a real emotion, are invitations, not threats. Rejection ceases to be a final verdict and becomes a teacher, guiding us toward contexts and relationships that honor our authentic selves. The liberation that arises is not mere relief from discomfort, it is an expansive awakening of potential. Each second that we face the terror of rejection is a moment that the psyche exercises its autonomy, affirming that life will be lived not by others' narratives, but by the beat of its own inner rhythm. It is worth noting that this process is not a rapid nor effortless one. The dread of rejection is ingrained deeply in the human fabric, inscribed in the unconscious through mere context, judgments, and letdowns. But repeated, conscious confrontation with it gradually erodes its hold. One comes to understand that pain is not danger, exposure is not destruction, and even at times of seeming failure, the self is still standing whole and unharmed. Eventually, the psyche acquires a sort of immunity, a strength that results not from arrogance, but from deep self-awareness and self-acceptance. In the end, to confront fear is to take back life itself. Fear, unchecked, controls the edges of our lives. It defines for us who to trust, what to seek, where to go. But when faced, it becomes a catalyst for growth, a signal of where the soul must journey to find its true strength. The freedom gained is holistic, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. It is the freedom to speak, to create, to connect, and to act without the paralyzing shadow of anticipated rejection in this encounter is the discovery that the sole authentic hindrance to truly living has been inside each one of us the entire time. The bravery to stand up to rejection isn't a promise of ease or the promise of victory. It is something more fundamental. The knowledge that one's life and one's value are not determined by the wavering opinions of others. Every act of courage in the face of fear, every decision to risk rejection, builds strength into the inner core, creating a self that is self-contained, secure, and unshakable. And in this creating of the inner fortress, life becomes something more than a timid avoidance of disapproval. It is a choice, a conscious and deliberate expression of the soul. Ultimately, freedom is not bestowed upon us by the world. It is seized by the individual through the relentless and fearless grappling with fear. When we are faced with rejection and we do not yield, we come to see the great truth that life is not something to negotiate for permission, but something to live loudly, completely, and with unflinching self-respect. To live honestly is to live life in a way that is both brave and intentional, to venture outside the safety net of appearances and the familiar mask of conformity. Most human beings, when faced with the pressure to belong, take the path of least resistance. They conform themselves to what others expect of them. They bend their words and movements to the will of the crowd. And by doing this, they gradually destroy the voice of their own soul. Authenticity is not an easy task in being honest. It is a deep dive into the inner workings of one's own soul, an excavation of the self that involves alertness, self-examination, and courage. The disguises we wear, the personas we adopt to secure acceptance, love, and approval aren't so tempting because they are comfortable. They provide the illusion of safety, a feeling of belonging, a temporary protection from the sharp bite of criticism and rejection. These masks, so protective as they are, slowly restrict the very life they are intended to protect. The self, deprived of its own expression, becomes fragmented, and the person moves farther away from the center of his or her own life. The human paradox is that the more we strive to be accepted, the less we are present in ourselves. Authentic living, therefore, requires us to shed the layers of expectation heaped upon us by the world. It requires us to see the insidious but subtle ways in which the fear of judgment controls our decisions. Every yes said out of duty, every sacrifice to escape censure is a strand in the fabric of self-betrayal. And yet, the journey to genuine living does not involve reckless revolt. It is an intentional development of integrity, a proactive sync between inward values and outward expression. To be authentic is to allow the inner life to guide action, even when the guidance is unpopular, misunderstood, or feared by those around us. Courage is the companion of authenticity. It is easy to imitate, to perform, to comply. It is far more difficult to confront one's inner truth and act upon it. To be real is to live in a world that usually misconstrues, judges, or resists those who will not yield. But it is this resistance that serves to hone the clarity of self. Every moment of disapproval is a moment to affirm the integrity of one's own person. Every moment of unease is a reminder that the deepest satisfaction in life lies not with other people's praise, but with the inner echo of the heart that realizes it has stayed faithful to itself. The path to authentic living is a path to self-discovery as well. To live authentically, one has to first know who he or she really is, beyond masks, beyond roles, beyond what society expects. This involves looking inward, honesty, and an openness to facing the shadows. The human mind is expansive, layered, and frequently contradictory. In fighting our fears, lusts, and contradictions, we start to find the shape of our very own lives. Authenticity does not come from perfection, nor from mere obedience to morality, but from rich communion with the entirety of one's self, the strengths, the frailties, the contradictions, and the repressed potential lying in wait beneath the surface. Second, living authentically converts the relationship with others. When a person ceases to act in order to gain approval, interactions are no longer transactions aimed at gaining acceptance. Rather, they become encounters that are based on truth and presence. Authentic relationships are deeper, more meaningful, and richer because they're not built on a weak foundation of illusion, but on the solid basis of self, knowledge, and truth. To live genuinely is to challenge others to do the same, not by coercion, but by the insidious, attractive power of integrity. Finally, the act of authenticity is an act of bravery in the service of life itself. It is a refusal to surrender the contours of existence to fear. It is a statement that one's own inner truth is holy and that living by it is more precious than the momentary comfort of acceptance. In the stillness of contemplation, When the world is peeled away and the self is left standing, authenticity is found to be the path to freedom. Every decision made from the place of the self, every decision made with inner truth in consideration instead of outer expectation, is moving further along the line of wholeness, of harmony, and toward the fulfillment of one's potential. No act of rebellion is greater, no act of creation is greater than to live in truth. It is not a gift of circumstance, but a call taken by those who will look within, confront fear, and act on the truths that rise. In this journey, one discovers that authenticity is not merely a trait to be admired. It is the very essence of what it means to be fully alive. And in embracing it, one finds a freedom and fulfillment that no external approval could ever provide. There is one silent but potent force that controls much of human action, a force that breeds doubt and hesitancy into the heart, fear of rejection. It is an intangible bond holding the soul to other people's expectations and opinions. Even in the earliest moments of our lives, we are taught to crave approbation, to shape ourselves so that we will be loved, known, or merely accepted. But in this quest, the self starts to splinter. The voice that is uniquely yours, the voice that knows your dreams, your gut instincts, and your inner truth, falls silent, lost under the din of incessant judgment. To live in fear of rejection is to live a life half-lived, always conforming, always sacrificing, never fully living your own essence. It is important to know that rejection, however stinging it could be, is not a measure of the profundity of your soul or the size of your worth. It is at most a reflection of another person's limitations, his fears, or his incapacity to see your true worth. As we let not being accepted take its toll on us, we have lost our power to forces beyond ourselves. But the reality is your inherent value is not contingent upon the passing opinion of others. You are complete, entire, and enough just by existing. To embrace this is to enter a space of freedom once denied by the burden of perceived judgments. The development of self-worth is no intellectual process. It is an act of deep psychological transformation. In every person is a treasure hidden under fear, social conditioning, and doubt. The treasure is the knowledge that value is not acquired by obedience, complimenting, or others' approval. It simply exists. The world might try to educate otherwise, with applause presented as a form of currency for validation, but these outside praises are tenuous and ephemeral. True power exists when a person can affirm the worth of their own life, abilities, and existence independent of external validation. To develop this awareness is to develop the self, to be gentle with it, and to accept its inalienable dignity. Fear, especially the fear of rejection, must be faced in order to achieve freedom. There is a human impulse to run from pain, to shrink away from the threat of disapproval. But in the conscious act of accepting rejection, we discover a shocking reality. Rejection, while painful, does not kill the soul. It provokes us. Indeed, it can hurt us, but it also educates us to be strong, self-knowledgeable, and independent. By staying through its sting, we discover that our nature cannot be taken from us, our existence cannot be discredited, and our life within cannot be lessened by another's judgment. The fear itself starts to dissipate, and the self comes out stronger, more distinct, and more vitally alive. Living in truth, therefore, demands courage of the most extraordinary kind. To be oneself to the fullest is to court disapproval, ridicule, or misunderstanding, but by this act alone does the individual become complete. To conform, to silence one's voice in order to be accepted, is to shatter the psyche and move away from richness of existence. Those who love the self with daring do not do so boastfully, nor do they initiate strife for itself. Instead, they pay respect to the distinctness of their own soul and permit it to express itself. True living is a work of original loyalty to the inner self, a recognition that the most profound fulfillment comes not from outer approbation, but from keeping in line with one's own ideals and integrity. Finally, the liberation from approval need is an act of deep rebirth. It is the turning point at which one ceases to trade the soul for other people's smiles and approvals. In this act, freedom is found, not freedom as unbridled excess, but freedom of spirit, freedom to live from one's own vision of life, and freedom to act with purpose and integrity. To exist independent of the validation of others is to be an independent being able to create love and exist completely on one's own terms. It is in independence that the genuine self is actualized, and the person finds that life at its fullness is present not as a prize for acceptance, but as a birthright of conscious living. The journey is not an easy one, for the habit of needing approval is strong, ingrained in the very fabric of life. But with each step toward self-acceptance without the need for outside validation, the psyche grows stronger and the way forward to wholeness is illuminated. There is a point at which one ceases to be afraid of what others will think, when the silence of the crowd no longer hurts. And when the self stands whole, unshattered and radiant, it is here, in this deep acceptance of the life within, that one understands life is not to be gauged by the approval of others, but by the heart to celebrate and love one's own self. Enter this freedom. Face your fear, see your inherent value, and take the sovereignty of your soul. Wait no longer for others to sanction your life, for it is already grand, already whole. The very moment you stop needing their permission is the moment you start living richly, fully, and without restraint.